In this tutorial, I'll show you how to create these railroad tracks in Blender. And these railroad tracks are customizable because they follow a curve, so you'll be able to go into edit mode of the curve and you can edit the curve handles and move them around to place the railroad tracks around in your 3D scene. And this is also a product which I'm selling on my Gumroad store as well as the Blender Market and my Patreon page, so if you'd like to purchase the product to add railroad tracks to your 3D scenes, I'll have the links in the description, and that's a great way to help support this channel. Or you can watch the tutorial and learn how to create it yourself. Now there's one more quick thing I wanted to mention before we start the tutorial, and that is that Blender Market is currently having their 2024 summer sale. And during the sale, all of my products are 25% off, so if you've been wanting to purchase some add-ons or products from the Blender Market, then now is a great time to purchase, and the sale will be going on from August 20th through August 25th of 2024, so definitely check out the Blender Market and get some great products during this summer sale. So here's the Blender file with the railroad tracks, and as you can see there is a curve right here in the center of the track. So if I select the curve and then go into edit mode, I can select the curve handles and I can scale the curve handles. I can also move the curve handles around. And if I want to keep the railroad track flat as I move the handles, if I press G to grab and then press Shift Z, that will exclude the Z axis. So I can just move it around on the X and Y axis. And I can also rotate the curve handles and just place the track where I want in the 3D scene. And then also to make the track longer, I can go back to object mode and I can just select the track object. And if you go over here to the modifier properties, you can scroll down and there is the array modifier, and you can turn up the count, and the count is going to array the tracks and make the railroad tracks longer. And you can of course go into edit mode of the curve, and then you can select the end of the curve handle and hit E to extrude, and you can extrude that out, and then you can select the track again and you can move it down here to move it along the curve. Now the rusty metal material on the train tracks is going to be created procedurally, but for the wooden cross ties, I'm going to be using this painted wood 008C, and this is a free texture from ambientcg.com. I'll have the link in the description, and because they're going to be pretty small, I'm just going to download the 2K JPEG version of the texture. And then also to get some lighting for the 3D scene, I'm going to be downloading this HDRI from polyhaven.com, and I am not even going to try to pronounce this, but I'll have the link in the description to the same HDRI if you want to download it. And I just downloaded the 1K version and the HDR version. So here we are in a new scene in Blender, and I'm going to have my screencast keys right down here in the corner if you want to see what buttons I'm pressing. So I'm going to start by just deleting everything. I'll now go to the add menu, let's go to mesh, and I'm just going to add a cube. And I'll press 7 on the numpad to go to top view. Let's save our project, so I'll click on file and save this project. And I'll just save this as railroadtracks.blend in a folder with my project files and save the project, and then just press Ctrl S as you're working on the project to save it. Let's hit the tab key to go into edit mode, and I want to scale this cube. So I'm first going to scale it, and I'll scale on the Y axis, and I'll type in 0.55 and hit enter. Then I want to scale on the X axis, so I'll scale it. Let's hit X, and I'm going to type in 0.16 and then hit enter. So it is much more thin. Then I want to move it along the X axis, so I'll hit G to grab. Then I'll hit X to move it along the X axis, and I'm going to type in 1.2, but then I want it to be negative instead of positive, so I'll type in negative after I type 1.2, and now it's going to be negative, and I'll hit enter. This way we can model it over on this side, and then we'll add a mirror modifier and mirror it over to the other side. So we're still on top view, so I'll press 1 on the numpad now to go to front view. And I want to scale it down along the Z because it's way too high up. So I'll scale it, and I'll scale it on the Z axis, and I'll type in 0.01 so it's really small. Then I'll press the period on the numpad to zoom over to the object, and I'm going to zoom in here with the scroll wheel, and I want to bring it up so it's resting on the X axis there. So I'll hit G to grab and bring it up on the X axis and just stick it right there so it's resting on the X axis line. So I'm now going to navigate up here, and I want to go to the face select, and I'm just going to select this top face here. And then I'll press 1 again to go to front view, and I want to extrude this up and scale it in and create the shape for the metal. So I'll hit E to extrude and just bring it up on the Z axis, then I'll scale it way down, and I'll scale it down on the X axis, so you can click and drag with your middle mouse wheel to constrain it to the X axis. And I want to scale up a little bit more and then bring it down, something like that. And then I'll extrude it up again on the Z axis, and then I'll scale it on the X axis and extrude up again on the Z axis and scale it down on the X. And then we'll extrude it up again, and now we'll start to make it coming out, so we'll scale it up on the X axis, extrude up again, scale it up a lot bigger, and then we'll extrude this up and we'll leave that flat. and then we'll extrude up again, and then this one we're going to scale down on the x-axis, just to create that basic shape there of the metal on the railroad. And then I will box select just these top vertices, and I think I'll scale them up a little bit and maybe make them a little bit thicker. And maybe I'll select the center loop and scale that up just a little bit so it's a bit thicker as well. So we're going to be adding an array modifier later, so this part is going to be arrayed over like that, and then it'll be continuing to array over. So what I want to do is delete the faces on this side and also this side. So we'll click here to go to the face select. You can deselect everything with the A key, and then you can click and drag just to box select those faces there and hit X to delete and delete the faces. Go over to this side, click and drag to box select them, and we'll delete those and just delete the faces so it's hollow. So now we're going to be creating the tie plates, which are going to be like these metal pieces which are connecting the metal part to the cross ties. So I'm going to select this plane right here, just this plane here on the side, and I'll duplicate it and move it out on the x-axis a little bit. Then I want to make it much smaller, so I'm going to scale it, and I'll scale it on the y-axis, and I'll type in 0.24 so it's much more thin. And then I'm also going to hit G to grab and bring this whole thing down on the z-axis just by a very small amount so that it's slightly lower than this metal part. And I will press 1 on the numpad to go to front view. I'll zoom in here, I'll hit G to grab and move it slightly inside this metal piece, and then I can extrude it out, and I'll just extrude out there to give it some thickness. Bring it out about that far. I also want to select the top face here, and I'll bring the top face down on the z-axis so it's a little bit smaller. Then I'll press Ctrl R to add a loop cut, and I'll left click and right click so the loop cut is in the center there. Then I'm going to go into wireframe view, and I'm going to click here to make sure that I'm selecting the edge select, and I'll select this edge, and we can bring it up on the z-axis. Let's go back to solid view. So just bring that up on the z-axis so it's going slightly up, kind of like that. So it's kind of coming up here on the side. And maybe I'll go back to the face select this face and bring it down a little bit farther so it's a bit smaller. Then I want to add a bevel to this loop cut that we made so that it is more smooth. So I'll click here to go to the vertex select. I'll hold down the Alt key and select that loop of vertices there. And I'll press Ctrl B to add a bevel, and I'm going to bring the bevel up, and then I'll scroll my mouse wheel until there are 2 cuts in the center, and we'll bring it about there, and then just left click and right click so they stay in the center. And just bring it about there, and then just left click there to place that. So we're going to be adding in some tie spikes, which are basically those big nails which are going down. And so I'm going to want to add a hole here and another hole here, and then we'll add some other ones over here as well. So I'll hold down the Alt key and select that loop of vertices right there, and I'll double tap the G key to activate the edge slide and bring it back a little bit, and then I'll press Ctrl R to add a loop cut. Let's click and drag it over here, just like that. So we're going to have a square part right here. So let's navigate over here to the side, and I'll press Ctrl R to add another loop cut. I can scroll my mouse wheel until there are 2 loop cuts, and I can left click and right click so they stay where they are, and then I can scale them all out on the y-axis, and we're going to make this a bit bigger, scale it out maybe to about there. Then I'll press Ctrl R to add another loop cut, and I'll scroll my mouse until there are 2, and I can left click and right click so they stay where they are. And then I'm going to scale these ones out on the y-axis, and I'm going to make it a square shape. So right here you can see these faces. I want those faces to be about a square. I can also hold down the Alt key and select that loop there, double tap the R key for the edge slide and bring that out a little bit farther. And then I want these to be square as well. So I'm going to press Ctrl R to add another loop cut and just drag this back here, maybe to around there so it's square. Maybe hold down the Alt key and select that loop there, double tap the G key for the edge slide and kind of bring it there into the center. So I'll now go here to the face select. We're going to select these 4 faces here. I'll hit X to delete and we'll delete the faces. Then I'll select the other faces here on the bottom. So select all those, X to delete, and we'll delete the faces. And now I just need to fill those extra faces. So let's first go over here. I'll go to the vertex select. We're going to hold down the Shift key and select these 2 and fill them. Then I can hold down the Shift key, select these 2 and fill those. And then if I just select these 2 vertices, I can press the F key 3 times, and that's going to go around and fill that hole. And let's do the same thing over here. So select these vertices, F to fill a face, select these vertices, F to fill a face, and then just select these 2, and I'll press the F key, and that's going to fill faces all along there. Now for these ones, I actually want to delete those faces right there on the side. So I'll go to the face select. We can select this face and delete it, and I'll select this face and delete it. And then I want to fill the faces in here. So it might be better, just to see this better, to select one of these faces right here, and you can press the L key. That's going to select the linked vertices, and I'll press the H key to hide that. Then if I zoom in here, I want to go to the vertex select, and I'll hold down the Shift key and select these 4 vertices and fill them with the F key. Then if I just select these 2 vertices, I can press the F key to fill that. Let's also select these 2 here, and I believe if you press the F key, that's going to go along there and fill that. So just press the F key to fill that in. And now I can press Alt-H to bring back the other part of the object that we hid. And make sure to press Ctrl-S to save your project. So now let's model those tie spikes, which are those big nails which are going down into the wood. So to do this, I'm going to hold down the Shift key and select these 4 vertices here, and I'll duplicate them and move them up, and we'll scale them down a bit. And I'll press 7 on the numpad for top view. I'll hit G to grab and move this here, scale it down and just make sure it can fit inside these holes right here. And I'll press the 1 on the numpad to go to front view, and I can bring it up a little bit. So just bring it up about that high. And then I can extrude it down, and we want to bring it down pretty far so it will go through that piece of wood which is on the bottom. So bring it down about that far. Then I can extrude the entire thing down on the Z-axis again, and we'll scale this down to make that spiky part of the nail. And then right here at the very end, just press the F key to fill a face there. And it looks like I need to select everything and press Shift N. Shift N is going to recalculate the normals. Then I'll just select this loop right here, and I'll extrude it, and then I will scale it. We'll make it a bit bigger, kind of like that. And then I'll select these 2 vertices here, and I'll extrude them out. We'll extrude them out on the X-axis. And then I want to press the L key with my mouse hovered over that nail to select the entire thing. And I want to bring the entire thing up on the Z-axis a bit. So now if I just select these 2, I can move them out a little bit farther. Let's press Ctrl-R to add a loop cut, and I will left click and right click so the loop is in the center. And then I will select these 2 vertices here, and I'll bring the vertices back a little bit, and I can scale it down a bit. And I might also want to bring this back a little bit, and maybe even bring these forward just a little, like that. So now I'm going to hold down the Alt key and select the entire loops on the outside, and also select that one there, and I'll extrude all of it up, just extrude it up like that. Then I'm going to select this one here and shift select that one here, and I'll press the F key to fill the faces there. Then I want to add a loop cut by pressing Ctrl-R, and I can left click and right click so that there's just one little vertex there, and I'll bring the vertex over, and then I can select these 2 vertices and fill a face there, select these 2 vertices, fill a face there, and then these here, I can select these 2 and fill a face, and also these here and fill a face. So that's going to be it for the tie spikes. You might want to bring that in a little bit. So something like that's pretty good. I also might want to bring these vertices out just a little bit, and then these vertices here and these vertices here, I might push them back in a little bit. There's a little bit of a better shape. So that's basically the head on the top of that nail. So now I'll press the L key with my mouse hovered over that nail, and we'll go to top view, and I'll duplicate it and move it over. You can go into wireframe and just make sure that the nail's in the very center there of that hole. So I'll go back to object mode now, and I'm going to use the object context menu, and I'm going to do the shade auto smooth. Now there's a problem with the shade auto smooth. You can see it's like smooth here, but then it's like really sharp here. The shade auto smooth is working well for the nails because this part is smooth, but then it's sharp here on the top, but I don't really like how that angle is. So after you use the shade auto smooth, you can click right behind me or right above me here on the shade smooth settings. And on the auto smooth, we want to turn the angle up to 80. And that way this part here is going to be smooth, but then right down here, this part is still going to be flat on the top. So that is how I want it. But then also right here, you can see this is really smooth and I want that to be sharper. So if I go into edit mode, I can press Ctrl-R to add a loop cut and click and drag and bring the loop cut down there pretty close to the end. And then Ctrl-R, add another loop cut and bring that pretty close to the end. But generally, I'm trying to keep this thing pretty low poly because this is going to be pretty small. You're going to be looking at it kind of far away and it's going to be quite large. We're going to be using an array modifier. So I'm trying to keep this kind of low poly. So that's why it looks a little bit blocky. So let's now create the cross ties, which are going to be those wooden planks. So I'll go into edit mode, and in edit mode, I will press Shift C to center the 3D cursor, and I'll go to the add menu, and I'm just going to add a cube. And we're going to scale the cube way down to a 0.05 and hit enter so it's much smaller. Then I want to scale it along the y-axis, so I'll hit S to scale along the y, and I'm going to scale that up by a 3.3 so it's a bit thicker. Then I'll press 1 for front view, and I'll zoom in here, and I'm going to bring it down so that it is underneath that x-axis line there. So just right about there. We're going to deselect everything and let's go into wireframe, and I'm just going to box select this side here, and we'll bring this side out and we'll bring it all the way over here. So it's just going through there and just going to go a little bit farther than the end of that metal piece. So something like that. And then you can adjust this if you want. So I think I'm going to go to the face select, just select this bottom face and bring it down a little bit so the entire thing is a little bit thicker, something like that. And I think this metal piece is a little bit too wide. So if I press the L key with my mouse hovered over all these pieces, I can bring that in a little bit just to make it a bit thinner. Maybe select these two side pieces and bring it out so that part is a little bit thicker. And then let's go over here to this side where the mirror is, and I want to select that face there, and we're going to hit X and delete the faces because we don't want a face in there where it's going to connect with the mirror. And then also press the L key with your mouse hovered over that cross tie there, and I want to add a bevel, so I'll press Ctrl B and I'll scroll my mouse wheel just so that there's one cut, and let me just bring that down. I'm going to hold down the Shift key to make my movements more sensitive, and I'll just add a very small bevel and then place that there. Go back to object mode, and again we're going to use the object context menu and do the shade auto smooth, and make sure to click on the shade auto smooth and make sure the angle is still at 80. So that's looking pretty good now. Let's press Ctrl S to save. So now we can start to add some more modifiers. So with the object selected, we'll go over here to the modifier properties. Let's click on add modifier, and I first want to add a mirror modifier, and you can see we're mirroring it on the x-axis, so that's great. Let's go into edit mode, and I want to go to the face select, actually the vertex select, and deselect everything, and I'm just going to select that loop of vertices there, and I want to turn on the clipping button so that it merges with the mirror, and then I can pull it back along the x-axis, so now it's merging with the mirror there in the very center. So I now want to add the array modifier to array it out, so I'll click on add modifier. Let's add the array, so search for array modifier. You can see it's being arrayed over this way, and that is because right here on the array modifier settings, it's being arrayed over on the x, but I want to instead use the y, so I'll turn the y factor to 1, and the x factor I'll turn to 0. So now if I turn the count up, you can see it's really starting to look like a railroad track, and we can turn that count up and make it as long as we want. So I now want to do the materials, but before we do the materials, I want to be able to actually see the materials well, so we need to set up some lighting. So to add in the HDRI, let's click over here to go to the world properties, and next to the color on the yellow dot, we're going to click on the yellow dot, we're going to choose environment texture, and then let's open up the HDRI. And here's the HDRI that I'm going to be using from polyhaven.com. Again, link will be in the video description if you want to download the same HDRI. So I'll just click on open image, and I'll hold down the Z button and go up into the rendered viewport mode to see this. And of course you could use the Eevee rendering engine if you want to, but I'm going to go for cycles. I'm going to use the cycles rendering engine so it looks a bit more realistic. Now I also want to add a sunlight, so I'll go to the add menu here, let's go down to light, and I will add a sunlight. Let's move the sunlight up here, and I can just rotate it over to the side a bit. And if I go here to the object data properties of the light, I'll turn the strength up to 8, so it is quite a bit brighter. And then also I'll go to the add menu, and I will add a plane. I'm going to add like a ground plane, and I'll scale this up pretty big. Let's move it over here. And then if I go back to solid view, let's go down here to the bottom, and I'm going to bring the plane down on the z-axis and just bring it down far enough so that just the nails are sticking through kind of into the ground. So that looks great. Let's go into the rendered viewport mode. And then also I don't really want to have the grid here. So if I click on this overlay setting, I can turn off the floor and turn off the X and Y axis so that that is gone. And let's add a very simple material to the ground just so that it looks a bit different from the railroad track. So if I click here on the materials, let's add a new material, and I can just call this ground. And then let's make the base color here really dark. And then also I'll turn the roughness all the way up to 1 so it is not very reflective, and make that even darker, maybe even make it fully black. Alright, so that's just going to be a basic ground. So it's really easy now to see the railroad tracks, and they're kind of popping out from the ground. So we'll select the railroad tracks, and let's click here to go to the shading workspace. And I can zoom in here, we'll go up into the rendered viewport mode, and we can now add the material. So I'll click on new to add a new material, and I'm first going to be adding in the wood material. So I can rename this material to wood cross ties. Now I will be using the Node Wrangler add-on while we're doing the shading. So to enable the Node Wrangler, you can click on edit and go to the preferences, and then go here to the add-ons tab, and here on the search, you can search for node and then just enable the Node Wrangler add-on, and then you can close the user preferences. So I'm going to be using a feature of the Node Wrangler add-on to automatically add in all the texture maps. So I'll select the principled shader, and then I'll press Ctrl-Shift-T, and that'll bring up Blender's file browser, and I can locate to the folder where I have the textures. So again, link is in the description if you want to download the same wood textures that I'll be using. And once you download the zip file, you can extract the folder, and then you can go inside the extracted folder, and then you can just select the 3 textures and then click on Principled Texture Setup. Now you can see that the wood is over the entire material, not just the railroad ties, but we'll be fixing that later. But for now, we're just going to focus on the railroad ties. So let's go into edit mode, and I want to UV unwrap this. So I'll select everything, and I'll hit the U button, and I'll do the Smart UV Project, and then just click on unwrap. Now you can see that the grain of wood is going in the wrong direction. So what I'm going to do is click here to go to the UV editing workspace and make sure you press the A key to select the entire mesh and then press the A key to select all the UV editing. And I'm going to rotate it by 90 degrees and hit enter. So if I go into the rendered viewport mode now, you can see that the grains of wood is going in the correct angle. And also if I go back into edit mode, I might scale the whole thing up a little bit so that the wood is a bit smaller. So we can go back here now to the shading workspace. Now there's just a couple things I want to do to this material to make it look a bit nicer. So one thing that I'll do is go to the add menu and I will search for the RGB curves, and we'll put this after the base color before the principled shader. So stick it there. And then I can click and drag here to add a dot, and I'll pull this dot up and then click and drag another dot here and bring this down. This is going to make it more contrasty and a bit darker. So I think that looks a lot better. And then I also want to add more surface bump to make it look pretty old and make it look really bumpy. So I'll go to the add menu and I'll search for the procedural noise texture. Let's drop this here. And then I can select this mapping and I'll press Ctrl-Shift-D. So Ctrl-Shift-D will duplicate the node, but it's going to keep the wire plugged up. And let's plug the mapping vector into the vector of the noise texture. And then let's Ctrl-Shift and select the noise texture to preview it. And I can change some of the settings. So I'm going to turn the scale to 1, and then I'll turn the detail to the max of 15, and I'll turn the roughness up to like a 0.6 so it has more detail. Now that doesn't really look like bumpy wood right now, but we're going to take this mapping node and we are going to stretch it. So right here on this X scale, we can stretch this, and you can see that now it's going to look more like wood. So I'm going to turn it to a 0.1 here on the scale X, and now it's going to be stretched out back and forth. So now this noise texture can go into the normal to give it some bump. So we'll go to the add menu and I'm going to search for a bump node, and we'll put this here after the normal. So stick it right there. And then the noise texture factor is going to go into the height value right there. So now if I Control-Shift and select the bump, you can actually see what it's doing. So here's just the normal map, and then here's the bump added to it. So that looks a lot more bumpy, and it makes the wood look more worn and old. However, the strength is a bit too much, so I'm going to turn the strength down to a 0.4 so it's less strong. So you can see now we're combining the two bump maps. So let's now Control-Shift and select the principled shader. You can see that wood looks a lot better now. So now we're going to be creating the rusty metal, and so what we're going to do is make this part look really rusty because it's been weathered and rained on, so the metal would get really rusty. However, right here on the top, it's going to be more smooth and more shiny and not rusty because the train wheels are moving along it. So we'll go into edit mode and I'll deselect everything, and then I'll hover my mouse over these pieces and press the L key to select the linked vertices, and we're going to select those 4 pieces. So let's click here to go to the material settings. We'll click on the plus here to add a new material. Let's click on new, and I can double click on this to rename it. And I'll rename this to metal tracks or whatever you want to call it. And then click on the assign button, and that'll assign the new material to that part of the mesh. And we can go back to object mode. So what we're going to be creating is a rusty material and a metal material, and then we will mix them together. So first let's create the rusty material. So I'll drag the principled shader up here. So to create the rust, I'll go to the add menu and I'll search for a noise texture, and let's Control-Shift and select the noise texture to preview it. And with the noise texture selected, I'll press Control-T to add the texture coordinate and mapping nodes. And I want to use the object coordinates because you can see the texture looks a little bit stretched. But if I use the object coordinates by putting the object into the vector of the mapping, that's going to make sure it places the texture more evenly on the object, so it's not stretched anymore. And actually, I don't need the mapping node, so I can select the mapping node and press Control-X to get rid of it, so we're just using the object coordinates. So now let's change some of that noise texture settings. So I'll turn the scale to 250, I'll turn the detail all the way up to 15, and I'll turn the roughness to a 0.66, so it's very detailed. So that's going to be the base rust texture. But then I want to create some colors for the rust, so I'll go to the add menu and I can search for the mix color, and we'll put this here after the noise, and I can put the factor into the factor of the mix. That way the light and dark values of the noise texture are going to determine what parts will be color A and what parts will be color B. So for color A, I'm going to make this kind of like a lighter brown, but it's going to be very red because it's rusty. And for color B, this is also going to be kind of like an orangey reddish brown, but it'll be darker. And if you want to use the same exact colors that I'm using, you can punch in the same hex values. So color A will be a hex value of 62, 3B, 2C. and color B will be a hex value of 3C0F07. So now what I want to do is create another texture which is going to be a bit bigger, and it's just going to be some darker areas, and we're going to mix that together with this noise. So what I'll do is select the noise texture, I'll press Ctrl-Shift-D to duplicate the node but keep the wires plugged up, and I'll Ctrl-Shift and select this noise texture to preview it, and we can change some of the settings. So for this one, I'm going to turn the scale to 2 so it's much bigger, and then I'll leave the detail at 15, and then the roughness I'll turn to a 0.55, so it's not quite as detailed. Now I want to make this a bit more contrasty, so I'll go to the add menu, and I'll search for a color ramp, and I'll put the color ramp here after the noise texture. And then I can drag the black tab over, and I can drag the white tab over so it's more contrasty, and I'll just go with something like that. So now we're going to just make it so that there are some darker parts there on the metal. So to do this, we're going to select the mix, and I'll press Shift-D to duplicate it, we can drop it here. Now this bottom mix here, this is going to go into color A, and then this color ramp here, the color is going to go into the factor. And then for color B, I'm going to make this another kind of reddish dark brown color, and the hex value will be 360E26. So now you can see like right here and some other spots here and there, it just has a little bit of dark patches, and that just makes it look a bit better. So now this mix result here can go into the base color of the material, and I can Ctrl-Shift and select the shader to preview it. Let's turn the roughness up to 0.6 so it's pretty rough, and we're not going to turn up the metallic value, because if we turn up the metallic value it's going to look more like metal, but the rusty part isn't really that metallic anymore because it's rusted so much. Now I do want to make this very bumpy, we need a lot more normal there to make the rust look bumpy, so I'll go to the add menu and I'm going to search for a bump node. Let's drop it here, and I can plug the normal into the normal, and then we'll also duplicate this node and we'll drop it here. So now we have the normal going into the normal of this one, and then the second one is going into the normal. So now we can add two different bump maps. So the first one is going to be the noise texture factor, so we'll put that into the height value, and that'll make it very bumpy, but it's a bit too strong, so I'm going to turn the strength to a very small number of 0.07, so it's just a little bit of surface bump. And then the second bump is going to be this color ramp color, so we're going to put the color into the height value, so that'll make it really bumpy. You can see now there's some really big bumps, but this is also too strong, so I'll turn the strength value to the same value of a 0.07. So now you can see that this rust looks quite bumpy. And then also something that I forgot to do real quick, just to make the lighting look a bit nicer, if we go here to the render properties, I can scroll down and we're going to open up the color management. Now here on the view transform, I'm going to use the AGX, or you could use Filmic if you want to. Those are some good color managements. And on the look here, I'm going to change this to very high contrast. So now you can see the colors are more contrasted and saturated, and just makes everything look a lot nicer. So that is it for the rusty material. So I'll box select all these nodes, and I'll press Ctrl J to join it together into a frame, and you can select the frame and press F2 to add a label, and you can just call it rust, just to keep the nodes nicely organized. So now the second group of textures is going to be pretty simple. It's just going to be a very basic metal material. So I'll go to the add menu and we'll search for a principled shader. We'll drop this here. We can Control Shift and select the shader to preview it. And I want to turn the metallic value all the way up to 1, and that way it'll act like metal. And then for the base color, I'm going to make it kind of like a light gray color. And the hex value that I'll be using for the light gray will be a hex value of 828282. And then we'll add a basic noise texture. So we'll go to the add menu. We'll search for a noise texture, and we can also plug the same object coordinates up to the vector. Let's Control Shift and select the noise texture to preview it, and we'll change some of these settings. So I'm going to turn the scale to a 12, and I'll turn the detail to the max of 15, and I'll also turn the roughness up to a 0.8 so it is more rough. Now I'm going to have this noise texture be affecting the roughness, so some parts are more rough and other parts are more shiny, and also the normal. So I'll put the factor into the roughness, and I can Control Shift and select the principled shader. Now you can see the contrast is way too strong, so that doesn't really look like metal. So to change the colors, we'll go to the add menu and we will search for a color ramp. We'll put the color ramp between the noise and the principled shader. And then I'll change the colors. So for this first color here, I'm going to make this a very light gray, and the hex value for this one is going to be 6 Cs. Then for the second tab here, this is going to be a bit of a darker gray, but they're both going to be kind of mid-gray colors, so the roughness isn't too different. And the hex value for this one is going to be 797979. So now we have a nice metal material. And then also let's plug the factor into the normal to give it some surface bump, but you can see there's weird shading issues, and that's because we need to go to the add menu and we need to search for a bump map, and we're going to put the bump map between the noise and the normal, and then the factor needs to go into the height via the bump to convert it to bump data. So now you can see it looks nice and bumpy. But I do want to make it pretty shiny and smooth, so I'm going to turn the bump strength to a 0.05 so it is very subtle. So now you can see we have a rusty metal and a regular metal. Let's also box select these nodes. I'll press Ctrl J to join them together into a frame. We can drag the frame down here, and if I press F2 to give it a label, I can just call it metal. So now we want to join the principled shader and this principled shader together. So if you select both of the principled shaders, you can press Ctrl 0. And Ctrl 0 is going to add the mix shader, and it's going to put them both together. Now, if I zoom in here, the factor is blending between only using the metal or only using the rust, but I want to create a mask, and I want to tell it that the top part is going to have the shiny metal, but then the bottom part is going to have the rust. So right in between these two groups of nodes, we're going to be creating the mask right here. So let's go to the add menu, and I'm going to search for a gradient texture, and then I'm going to plug the same object coordinates up to the vector of the gradient, and let's Control Shift and select the gradient to preview it. Now if I zoom out, you can see one of the tracks is black and the other track is white, and that is because the gradient is fading right here in the center. So what I want to do is rotate the gradient so that it's darker down here and then it's lighter up at the top. So I'll go to the add menu, and I'm going to search for a mapping node. We'll put the mapping node here after the gradient texture, and then we can change the rotation values to rotate the gradient. So what I can do is turn this Y value to 90, and now you can see that it's black down on the bottom, but then it's kind of getting lighter and lighter as it goes up to the top of the material. And if it's still not working correctly, you could take the X location, you could move it up and down, and that would change where the gradient is, but I'm going to leave it at 0 because that's great right there in the center. Now, I do want to also add a noise texture because I want it to look kind of noisy on the edge. Instead of it blending really smoothly, I want it to be more noisy on the edges because the black part will be the rust and the whiter part, that's going to be the smooth metal. So I'll go to the add menu, and I'm going to search for another noise texture. We'll drop it here after the gradient or under the gradient, and the object coordinates is going to go into the vector. Let's Control Shift and select the noise texture preview, and I'll change some of these settings. So I'll turn the scale to 30, I'll turn the detail up to the max of 15, and I'll turn the roughness up to like a 0.7. So I now want to mix the gradient and the noise together, and we're going to make the noise distort the edge of the gradient. So I'll select the gradient and the noise texture together. So with both of them selected, you can press Ctrl 0, and that's going to add this mix color here. So the gradient color will go into the top one, and then the noise texture factor, that's going to go into the bottom one. Now, if I drag the factor, that's going to blend between using all the noise or using the gradient. So I'm going to turn the factor to a 0.1, just change it to a 0.1. So now you can see there's a bit of noise there in the gradient. Now I want to make it much more contrasty, so we'll go to the add menu, we're going to add a color ramp, and we'll put the color ramp here after the mix. So now if we drag the black tab and the white tab together, that's going to make it really contrasty, so you can just see that noise where the edge is because it's really contrasty. So we're basically making the gradient really sharp, so now you can just see that noise there on the edge. Let's box select all these nodes here, so box select these nodes in the center. We can press Ctrl J to add a frame. I'll select the frame and press F2 to add a label, and I'll call this mask. So now this color ramp color can go into the factor of the mix shader, and I can Control Shift and select the mix shader to preview it. So there we have it. Now you can see the rust is down here, but the shiny metal is up here, and you can of course adjust the color ramp to kind of change where you want the rust to start and where you want the metal to start. You can also drag this factor around too. So if you want the rust to be more subtle, you could maybe turn the factor up so it's more subtle, or you could make it really strong. All right, let's save this file again, and I can go back over here to the layout. And now we are ready to actually add this to a curve. So it's going to follow a curve so you can put the train tracks around in your 3D scene. So I'll go to the add menu. Let's go down here to curve, and you could add a Bezier curve, or you could also add a path if you want to. I'm just going to add a path here, but you could also add a Bezier curve. And then I'll press 7 on the numpad for top view, and I'm going to move this over here kind of into the center. And then I'll go into edit mode, and I'm going to scale the entire thing up a bit, and then I can also rotate it in edit mode by 90 degrees, and maybe scale that down a bit. So it's about the same size as the track. And then if I select these points here, I can hit G to grab, and I can move these around. So I'm going to go back to object mode now. So now you can see the curve is in the very center. Let me actually scale it down a little bit. So something like that. So now what I'm going to do is hold down the Shift key and select the curve and the track. And I'm going to move them here into the center of the 3D scene. So just about right there in the very center. And I guess I can select these objects and move them over as well. So they're kind of in the center. So now I'm going to select the curve and the track again, and I'm going to press Control A, and I'm going to apply the location, and that way the origin point will be in the very center, and I find that that just works better when you're making the track follow the curve. So we'll select the track, and we can click here on the modifiers. We'll click on add modifier, and we can search for the curve modifier. So add the curve modifier, and we can scroll down here, and on the curve modifier curve object, we can click here, and then we can just select the curve that we've added. Now you can see it's moving over here at a weird angle, and that's not really correct. And that's because we need to change the deform axis. So you can hold down the control key, and then you can scroll the deform axis to find the correct axis. Now hopefully this isn't happening for your scene, but for some reason it always seems to happen for my scene. I find that the best source axis to change this to is X, because if I change it to any other source axis, it's not working correctly. If I turn it to -Y, it is working correctly, but the train track is upside down, so that's not going to work well. If I change it to X, it does work correctly. However, to make it work correctly, I need to select the train track, and I need to rotate it, and I need to rotate it on the Z axis by 90 degrees, and then hit enter. And then if I move the object back and forth on the x-axis, I can align it with the curve. Even if I select both the curve and the train track and apply the location and rotation, I get that issue. But if someone knows in the comments why that's happening, and if someone has a fix for that, definitely let me know in the comments, and maybe I'll pin your comment. So now that it's following the curve, I can go into edit mode, and I can move the curve handles around, and you can see the train track is going to follow the curve. And if I'm moving it around, but it's like moving it up and down, if I want to make it move along a flat surface, I can hit G to grab, and then I can hit Shift Z. That will exclude the Z-axis, and now I can just move it around wherever I want, but it's going to stay flat along with the ground plane. And also, if I want to make the track longer, I can select the track, and I can go to the array modifier, and I can turn up the count to make it much longer, and now the train track is going to be much longer than the curve. So that's going to wrap it up for this tutorial. So that is how you create these customizable railroad tracks with Blender. So I hope you found the video helpful, and I hope you enjoyed following along, and thank you so much for watching. And if you'd like to purchase the Railroad Tracks product which I'm selling, which is the project files of this tutorial, then you can get that on my Gumroad store and my Patreon page, and also the Blender Market, and a few other 3D model sites. I will have the links in the description, and that's a great way to help support this channel. But I hope you enjoyed the video, and thank you for watching.